All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Asian Business Leaders panel. This is our third one. I'm very excited to be introducing our panelists today. I'm Peter. I started this because I think that today out in mass media, even on social media, we don't see a ton of faces that look like us on this panel today. We know the celebrities out there in Hollywood and sports, but there's a lot of folks within the business arena that are doing amazing and inspiring things. So this is my small effort to really get us out there and have some real conversations on what it's like to be Asian in the professional world. So let me start with introducing our panelists. Like I said, I'm going to start with Jason Shen. Jason and I went to college together. We actually didn't talk to each other back then, but I definitely remember, Jason, seeing you do your like crazy things on the gymnastics floor. But he coaches outlier founders and executives to master hard pivots. He actually previously co-founded three venture-backed startups and led product teams at Etsy and Facebook, now Meta. He's also a two-time Stanford graduate. He was an NCAA men's gymnastic national champion, as I was alluding to, and serves on the board of Lunar Excel, which is the premier nonprofit career accelerator for emerging AAPI leaders. So, Jason, thanks so much for being with us today. I'll move on to
Thanks, Peter.
Alex. Alex Paz has over 20 years of experience in SaaS sales, specializing in HR technology specifically. He's worked at companies like Connexa, which was acquired by IBM, Taleo, which was acquired by Oracle, and is currently a senior sales executive at Workhuman, which is a unicorn tech vendor in the employee rewards and recognition space. He's an advocate for diverse sales talent and selling in a way that's authentic to each individual, but grounded in solid fundamentals. He's also a proud girl dad who wants to leave the world of work better for them. Leave the world of work better for them in the future. Alex, thanks so much. I met Alex through LinkedIn, actually. His content really resonated with me. So, very awesome to have you here. Appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Awesome. So Ding and I also met on LinkedIn. I actually think all of us met on LinkedIn in some
Yeah.
capacity, right? But Ding Zhang, I remember just pouring through his rap videos for like hours when I first came across him. And he's the co-founder of Event Shark, which is a B2B content production company. As a musician and content creator of 15 years, he's leveraged his rap and sales skills to create intensely original and relevant content that gets viral attention and inbound from the ideal customer profile. He's partnered with leading platforms such as Vimeo, SalesLoft, and Demandbase, and delivered custom videos and live freestyling hybrid shows for offline conferences, events, sales kickoffs, and webinars. I wish I had you at one of our sales kickoffs, Ding, but this is second best. And maybe you'll do some freestyling later, who knows? But again, thank you all for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Let's start with kind of an overarching question. I mentioned a little bit about how there's not a ton of business professionals that we see, especially when we were growing up in tech sales, business sales. I didn't see a lot of leaders who are Asian American. So, do you all feel like the bamboo ceiling has now been lifted? How do you feel about that? And how are you overcoming it in your day-to-day now being 2024 April? So let's start, Jason, why don't we start with you on that topic?
Yeah. My dad got a doctorate from Boston University and then worked in the same job or in the same department his whole career in the Department of Education. So I didn't really have a role model for someone who was like climbing the corporate ladder or even like an entrepreneur or a business owner or even a corporate leader. Um, I think in retrospect, he did also found a nonprofit Chinese language school in our town that's grown a lot. But it didn't really kind of click to me that like actually my dad is also a founder because,
Mm.
that sort of was just like a community thing. That was just like a Chinese thing. But, I think that's almost my own dismissal of our culture and his cultural impact. Uh, for me, I think the bamboo ceiling has come up in different ways. My last companies, I was the CEO and my white male co-founder was the CTO. And sometimes I wonder if investors were sort of like confused and wondering if like, wasn't it the reverse? Like, aren't you supposed to be the CTO and then he's supposed to be the CEO? I wonder if maybe if we pretended that was the case, we would have raised more money or something. Like, that's something that kind of like is in the back of my mind. No one like blurted that out to me, but it's just sort of like the pattern this was like the anti-pattern that I saw of 90% of the companies I was running into with this pairing had the reverse. Um, The other thing I'll say to kind of wind down is like my friend Chris Ye, who has written a number of books with Reid Hoffman and Ben Casnocha, will say to me frequently, like as a business author, it is almost never that he sees he'll go to other business author events and he'll almost never see another Asian person, Asian man, and he still feels like it's kind of rare to see that. So I think that we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. On that, actually, for me in sales, I think a lot of customers thought I was a sales engineer. And even if I introduced myself as a account executive, I would get the technical questions thrown at me. So yeah, kind of similar dynamics as you like and your CTO, right? Appreciate you sharing all that. Alex, how about you? What's your experience kind of being an Asian professional, and what are your thoughts on the bamboo ceiling today?
Yeah, I think there's been progress, but like many things, there's a lot of work to do. And I think it's manifested itself in two ways. One is the perception that folks have of Asians in a professional setting and those preconceived notions of, what are you looking for in a leader, and do those profiles have those characteristics? But on the flip side, and this is personally in my own journey, I think part of it is also manifested through our cultural beliefs and some of the things that have been ingrained in us as young children, even into adulthood. So as an example, you don't question authority. You consistently do a good job, and you are appreciative at a very high level of what you have. And so the experience for me was realizing that I needed to be a stronger advocate for myself. There is a characteristic that we have that I think is beautiful, which is that quiet confidence. But in order to progress in this day and age, you do need to advocate for yourself, and you need to advocate for yourself in a consistent and a strong fashion, because that's what's required in this environment.
Yeah, totally. We're all raised to be humble and collaborative, but if you don't speak up, nobody's going to notice you, right? So it's a lot of it's incumbent on you for sure. Ding, how about you? You've done sales like early in your career. Now
Yep.
you have your own company. So can you talk to us about your experience with the bamboo ceiling and kind of how you're dealing with it today as a business owner?
Yeah, certainly, Peter. I think your point about the sales org and general company structure where Asian folks might get typecasted, right, with certain stereotypes of what their strengths are in the workplace can have a big impact on the career progression, the types of roles that those in charge think that the stereotype is qualified for, right? Which we all know is not the case in reality. And during my time at Yelp, I have this story that I always refer back to is I was a Mandarin Chinese translator at Yelp, and then the company didn't sponsor any H-1B employment immigrants at the time. So the entire sales org was all the Asians were Asian American, right? And what was interesting is as the Mandarin translator, I would often field calls from Vietnamese businesses, Koreans, right? And folks, just anyone with an accent, one of the calls would get routed to me, right? And that
Wow.
really stood out as this form of microaggression in the workplace where kind of all I'm seeing as a commodity for my ability to translate into a foreign language, which even then the targeting wasn't always correct, right? And there was almost this feeling of within that organization, if you're Asian, then you're seen as an IC. You can go up the enterprise ladder, right, and go far there, but you're never going to move over to management, regardless of your people skills. A lot of the folks that I worked with from an Asian background, right, just as qualified, if not more qualified than the other candidates. But during the interviews for the promotion track, right, it'd be a very similar result. And then switching gears after I left the corporate grind, going into becoming the sales rapper and starting my founder journey, what I found is I've had two businesses since my W-2 days, and the first one was sales rapper where I was the sole founder, and I was Asian, right? And obviously I'm Asian. And let's call here. And now at Event Shark, my co-founder is a white dude, right? And I think Jake is great as it brings a lot to the table, but certainly during conversations with potential prospects, at networking events and whatnot, there is that difference in feeling of we're coming in and here's a sole Asian founder versus a team with a white person on it. So that's kind of my experience on this.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely still exists, right? And in my work, I work a ton with VC partners and startup coaches directly, and there's definitely a different vibe, I'll say. But the opportunity there is I've also started leaning into it a little bit. When I do talk to an Asian founder, an Asian VC person, I talk about the bamboo ceiling almost within the first 5 minutes as a passion area. So I'm curious, actually, Jason, because you work with a lot of founders, like tell us a little bit more about what you do. And do you kind of have that experience as well, where you're starting to feel more comfortable leaning in? And does your clientele kind of reflect your community more, or is that not the case?
Yeah. So I use this term outlier to describe the type of folks I work with. Anyone who wants to, go and start their own venture and raise venture capital or even bootstrap is already sort of saying like, hey, I don't think the existing systems, there's so many companies, there's so many jobs already, but no, I got to go and make my own thing, right? Like that's already saying something. Not to say there aren't some outliers who work at companies as well, but many of them are Asian. I think I've fluctuated between maybe like 30 to 50% Asian in my clients. So certainly a number who are not and maybe drawn to me because of ADHD or just, looking for a coach that has had business experience and not just been in kind of the coaching capacity their entire career, which some folks are and can be really valuable as well. In terms of what I've seen, I'll talk about two examples. One is a client who was an engineer pretty early in his careers, founding member of a team, and then was kind of promoted to co-founder, but didn't really understand what that meant, and maybe didn't understand what.
Oop, can you both all still hear Jason, by the way? No, Jason, we lost
Oh,
you.
how about now? It just showed me something. Are
Okay,
we
yeah, we
back?
can hear you
Okay.
now. Yeah.
So I'll restart there. Sorry about that.
All good.
So I'm thinking about this one, two clients real quick. The first one, early in his career, founding engineer of a startup, kind of got promoted to co-founder, but didn't really understand what it meant to take on that role and what kind of leader he wanted to be. I think in his mind, he saw leadership as being like kind of like telling people what to do, top down, very direct, very aggressive. And he was like, I'm not that kind of person. I like to listen to music. I like to watch anime. I like to, I don't see myself fitting that mold, and therefore can I not be a leader? And a lot of the work that we were doing was that there are many different ways to lead. There are many different ways to be a leader, and how can he find his own form of leadership? So that's certainly one dimension of it. Another client that I work with is a C-level executive at a billion-dollar hospitality company, and he is, Asian American and younger in an environment with a lot of older folks who are white. And I think a lot of them look at him as kind of the outlier. Like, so he's working inside of a company, but he's like, oh, I know. You look at the management chain, and you look at me, something doesn't look the same.
Yeah.
And so he's constantly sort of like, there's a level of caution and maybe like constant like questioning if people really trust or respect or like are going to follow what he's doing. And that is something that has come up, and I think is something that we work around, is like, what does it mean to show maybe a sense of vulnerability, a sense of like, you can, to get trust, you need to show that you will trust, and like it has to kind of go both ways to get some of that rapport that maybe you're looking for, and you withhold and then you get withheld. And so that's like a example of another kind of situation that we come across.
That's super interesting. And for that executive in particular, has he opened up? Like, does he talk about race with his other counterparts and peers? Like, I'm curious, because I do agree, like kind of being vulnerable with your peers and opening up is a big part of building trust, even in large companies, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. It's been a process to get there. I think it took some time for us to even establish that as a conversation point in our own sessions. And I think that's
Mm.
part of what coaching is to like, it's like a safe place to practice conversations that then you can take into other spheres and spaces. So that's a work in progress for us.
Yeah, it makes sense. It has to also be a two-way street, right? Like the environment has to be conducive to that as well. So if you have a bunch of white male executives who are not being vulnerable, then where's the space for that, right?
A lot
So,
of it actually turns into this like, US versus abroad dynamic. And so
mhm.
it's not even as much about because there's sort of like a second dimension. They're not white, they're like white and in Europe. So it's sort
Oh,
of like
wow. Okay.
that's where more of it's like the New York people versus the like Europe people. And so like there's a second dimension to that, which is like interesting.
Yeah, yeah, there's so many like intersections of this topic. Alex, I want to transition to you because you're at Workhuman. You've worn a lot of different hats and kind of going to what I was saying around it being a two-way street to show up Asian in a specific company. I'm sure you've seen like great examples of allies, and folks who are non-Asian at Workhuman who've really supported you. So can you give us a few examples of how that's been, being I think you've been there for how many years now?
9.
9 years, almost a decade, right? So, something's going right there where it probably feels like a safe environment. So just curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back and then I'll pull forward, but I have been either the only minority or the only Asian American on all of the sales teams that I've been on in my 25-year sales career.
Wow.
So with that, I always talk, especially now when I am very vocal and I try to be vulnerable so that people understand the perspective that there's kind of this concept of lived experiences and experiences that we may not really have lived and experienced, but it's in our minds and it's always there and constantly talking to us in our ear saying, as an example, I've been at places where I definitely had to produce at a higher level than my non-minority or non-Asian counterparts, without question. I was looked at and had to deliver at a higher level to even stay at the level that others were at. But there are also places where I probably carried that through and that mentality through into new organizations where I wasn't really living that experience, but that's how I operated. That's just became part of my DNA. And so even having those conversations with my peers here at Workhuman and just um, talking through those experiences, direct or indirect, so they had an understanding of like where I'm coming from and why I may do or operate the way that I do. Another part of it was just starting to feel more comfortable in my own skin and starting to say, you know what, I want to be more vocal. I want to step up and talk about these things. I don't want to sweep them under the rug. And even in our own organization, where we have work to do as far as the diversity of our workforce and the diversity of our sales force, where I will vocally say, okay, we're doing a good job. We have probably a much stronger female representation than what I've seen in other organizations, but we still have work to do as far as it relates to minorities and Asian Americans in different roles and leadership roles. So for me, that has translated into um, when I finally made the decision that I wanted to go into leadership, that's where I had to become vocal and say, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. And these are the reasons why I believe I'm a good fit for these leadership roles and future leadership roles. Not just because of what I've done on paper as far as producing, because that's typically and unfortunately what we use a barometer for who becomes a leader is who produces the most. And unfortunately, in my own experience, the best salespeople do not always make the best leaders, and for a variety of reasons. But saying that these are the things that I have done, these are the things that I want to do, and being vocal about it and making it, going back to the self-advocacy, making those folks that make those decisions aware that that's what you want to do. So, part of it in this journey for 9 years, where actually coming back into this year, the last 2 years, I was in sales leadership roles, and I tried to pick the ones that I thought I was the best fit for, where I could bring a unique perspective. But there was a moment in time where I was asked to take on a role that I denied because I said that's not the right fit for me. the right fit for myself and my family. And, you know, that's a scary position to be in, where mentally those thoughts were starting to creep back in and saying to myself, what if I never get another shot at leadership because I turned this down? And then I have to go back to being an IC because that's all that's left for me. So there's a little bit of the journey over the last 9 years, but part of it is really becoming more comfortable, more vocal, highlighting the differences, and not saying that one way is better than the other, but highlighting that, you know, there are, especially when it comes to sales, you can have strong sales methodology, and that's what I mean by like having good fundamentals. But what we need to do is advocate for the unique skills and approaches that we have, both culturally and in our unique individual approaches to how we work and how we engage, and the EQ that we have when we engage with folks in sales, that we need to promote that as much as well.
Yeah, I love that you're doing that. I'm sure like a lot of the junior folks at Workhuman are looking at that and feeling like they have some air cover from somebody that looks like them. I used to do that too. In my previous job, it was the first VP job where I spoke about my identity to my teams during like kickoffs, right? Be like, hey, I'm an Asian sales leader. Like I didn't see anybody like me, but I need you to know that means I also operate differently. I'm not going to look at the person speaking up first and saying, wow, they have great ideas. I like more intentional kind of sales reps who are thoughtful, empathetic, and can listen to the customers, not necessarily like listen to themselves, right? Which is a core skill set in sales, but it's often missed in like Western sales teams, I think. So I appreciate you sharing that. Ding, you do like sales kickoffs, and I'm sure a lot of your clientele, there's not like seas of Asian people out there, right? When you're like rapping in front of them. So I mean, you have like a ton of intersections of identity, right? You're rapping, first of all, which is not traditionally an Asian skill set, I would say, stereotypically. And then you're doing sales kickoffs for, I'm sure, heavily white dominant sales forces. So can you just talk about kind of how, I mean, it's fascinating and super interesting. I just love to hear you talk about it. Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear? Ding. Oh, Ding,
He's on
you're on
mute.
mute.
I think I was on mute. All right.
There you go. Okay.
I love this topic. You know, we love talking about intersectionality over here in this corner of the internet. First and foremost, right? Recognizing that, you know, I play in a predominantly white space. I do a culturally Black art form where I am a guest in that culture, right? When I spit, and then I have an Asian face, and I'm putting on for us good folks over here, right? So there's a lot of nuance and you know, being careful with how I present myself and represent all facets of these cultures to make sure, you know, one, it's not offensive, right? And two, I'm representing, you know, in the most positive, you know, change focused way. And I think a lot of this boils down for me to, you know, one, being able to code switch, right? Depending on what spaces you're playing in. And I think that's a skill certainly that has benefited me a lot in a lot of different rooms, a lot of different situations, particularly on the corporate side, right? And I think a good strategy for that for me was really thinking about personal brand in an intentional way. And when I say personal brand, the one piece that everyone's familiar with is being an influencer, making content, you know, how you're representing yourself on the internet. But I would argue that an even more important aspect of that is the in-person element, whether that's within your company, within your organization, or within a specific industry and community. And so I think what's kind of slept on for a lot of, you know, Asian folks in the industry that I know, like at least on the sales side, is the power of, you know, personal brand on LinkedIn, right? That's how I've met a lot of y'all folks, a lot of good people. I see people like Trinity Nguyen over at I think User Gems, right? Marcus Chan's, Peters, you know, the world, that are really representing the Asian faces of the industry well. And I think sales specifically, right? I think the stereotype of what a good sales leader looks like versus what the commonly held stereotypes of Asians are, you know, in certain cases may be at odds. And that's where that bamboo ceiling could come in and limit. And I think one strategy to combat that is on the personal brand side, whether internally or externally, being able to overemphasize, some of those points that, may be interpreted as a weakness, which I think, can be strengths as well. And is also not universally applicable, but crafting that narrative in a strategic way, to where, it might mitigate some of the effects of certain stereotypes when you're actively, saying, hey, this is not true about me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you're
In essence,
breaking
playing
down.
the game.
Yeah, you're breaking down so many, stereotypes, but then like the complexity is that you also want to speak to the things that maybe potentially are stereotypical of Asians, but are superpowers versus like negative aspects,
Yeah.
right? So I appreciate you sharing all of that. I want to shift a little bit to kind of Asian male like mental health. What do you call it? Like just the topic. I'm even having a tough time bringing it up because it came up in our first business panel where it got really real around folks grappling, especially in the age of social media, with community and just being happy and fulfilled. So, Jason, I'm going to start with you, like a two-part question. First is, do you have kind of a community of Asian males that you lean on? I could tell you from my perspective, I don't really have a formal community, actually. Like that's why things like this are pretty special for me. And secondarily, like, what are your thoughts on mental health? May is going to be mental health awareness. I've grappled a lot with it. I've had a younger sister who unfortunately passed by suicide. And so it's always top of mind for me, but not talked about. So yeah, can you start kind of talking about the topic because it's very important, I think, for founders specifically, especially when they're
Yeah.
pivoting, and for Asian males because it's a very taboo topic in general.
Yeah. I also would say it's sort of like a mixed bag for me in terms of like a group. I did grow up in high school. I had a group of Asian guys that we were like our crew,
Yeah.
but we sort of lost touch and things have changed over time. So it's hard to sort of feel that sense of the cohort anymore. I think of individuals. I think of my friend Brian Wang, who is also an executive coach, was previously a PM. He and I have exchanged some conversations around coaching and around, I think, recognizing that we're both Asian men in a field that, again, that's not a common role. There was a Facebook group I was a part of for a while called Badass Asian Dudes, and that was kind of fun. There was some meetups that I went to that sort of like were speaking to that. So that's sort of like I was seeing them sort of invest in that, and I'm no longer super close to that community, but I felt that comfort there. And then I have another friend, Bilal, who I went to Stanford with, who is Pakistani American, and he and I are just good friends. But I think some of the cultural upbringing, even though East Asian and South Asian a little bit different, still this like respect for family, this respect for trying to do right by so many different types of people and maybe not knowing where you get to sit in all of that. I think that's still a challenge. So it's a thing I'm still kind of working through. And, I think there's this growing movement of men's groups. And part of me is like, maybe I could join a men's group. I'm, might become a father in the next year or so. And I'm like, maybe I
Oh,
want to become a
nice.
dad or start like
Yeah.
an Asian dads men's group. I think that would be really interesting, but I have to become a dad first to get there. So that's I think part of it. And then in terms of I think yes, part two is like mental health. It was you know, I have worked with coaches myself in several different periods, and the last two coaches I've had were Asian American, right? Like Asian American woman who I worked with to leave Etsy to go full time, and previous to that, an Asian man who was an executive coach who I worked with during my last two startups. So I think both of those are really meaningful, and we did talk about race, and we did talk about expectations we held for ourselves, like transmitted cultural expectations around like being a provider, but also wanting to kind of like be creative, wanting to be a maybe more of a emotional we talk a lot about being a financial provider, but one of the things that I took out from my own family was sort of my mom often feeling like my dad was too invested in work and not invested in her emotional needs. And so I try really hard to be emotionally available to my wife in like practically an errand completely, sort of like there for her. But then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, am I not bringing enough money in? And the sort of like now I'm falling short of my other responsibility. So I think these are questions that I'm grappling with and continue to grapple with. So I don't think there is. I think it's like an ongoing journey. Um, and the last thing I'll say on this topic, because I think this is like such an important point, is that I don't see a lot, there's talking about it and then there's writing about it. My argument of like, so many memoirs have come out in the last couple of 10 years of Asian women talking about their experiences, and they have such important experiences to share of growing up and their experiences moving through the world that it's different in a lot of ways. But how many like Asian men's memoirs have you seen? There's only two that even come to mind. The Shang-Chi actor Simu Liu, I think, came out with one. I have it on my bookshelf. I haven't really cracked it open. It felt a little bit like, let's get it out while, I'm in the kind of news.
Yeah.
Just to be honest. And then the, the
Yep.
the second one though that I think is underrated and very few people talk about, so I'm gonna like hype it here. Big Little Man by Alex Paz. Has anyone
Hmm.
heard of this book?
No, I have
Um,
not. Yeah.
Came out in 2014. Part of it, he was like an Atlantic magazine writer. I think he's like Filipino or like Southeast Asian, but he died like shortly after the book came out, which was really sad.
Wow. Hmm.
Because it's called In Search of My Asian Self, and it's part memoir, part like cultural commentary about what it's like to be Asian. He talks, about, dating, and talks about like just getting jobs and just like moving his way through the world in a way that I've really never seen before or since. And I think
Wow.
part of what I want to see more of is Asian men talking about it in settings like this, which is, I think, a good starting point, but also in other forms and formats. And I
Hmm.
think that that's really because that carries, right? You can hold on to that and like have a relationship with someone, even if you aren't friends, right?
Yeah.
You can sort of be mentored and you can be held outside of the like direct person to person relationship, and it scales. So anyway, that's my little
I
soapbox
love
for
that.
that.
I'm gonna look that up actually. And yeah, I think there's an important point there where we're not like conditioned to be vulnerable as Asian men. And in fact, it's like sometimes looked down upon, which is why I appreciate all of your writing. Like specifically, like with you, Jason, you talk about how it's hard to pivot in your failures with your startups versus like your successes. And I think we just need to like normalize that more because it does impact a lot of people. So I appreciate you sharing that. Alex, how about you? I know like your content, I love it because it like hits an emotional tone, as much as you're talking about, your professional side of things with, you recently went to a conference, but you talk a lot about just like inspirational, motivational topics, and mental health, I think, has also come up. So can you
Yeah.
talk about the topic and, where you lean to in terms of getting support?
Yeah, sure. I know, I find it curious because, as Asian men, we are supposed to be very strong, yet it's a perception that we are not for leadership roles. And it takes, I talk about it in the sense like there is a weight of the world on your shoulders that you carry, that it is difficult to carry every day. And it becomes difficult, in my adult life. My wife is Caucasian. Obviously, I have multiracial kids. And there's part of my culture that I want to pass down. But I even talk to my parents about there's part of our culture that I don't want to pass down, or that I want to modify and tweak to make it better for them, for this day and age and for the future. And so, as far as groups, I haven't found necessarily a group, but I have been more intentional about seeking out other Asian males in various communities, whether it be in sales or just local business communities here in the Boston area, or just expanding my network, whether it be sales related or not, on LinkedIn. To Ding's point, I think we have a huge opportunity as a community to use LinkedIn and other social channels to really broadcast and amplify our message and
Mhm.
to support one another. So when I do see, content by other Asian creators, I try to double down and double click on those folks so that I can carry my following
Yeah.
to those individuals who are maybe just starting out in their content creation. And for me, it's been a really just creating that content and putting the words on paper. And it's funny that Jason mentioned like writing a book, because that has been something that has been on the back of my mind. But again, those demons that you think you have control over start to speak to you again and say, who are you to write it? Like, who's gonna read your book? Like, who cares about your life?
Yeah, Jason's authored a couple books, at least one book, right?
Recently a book about pivoting, but I think it's very different, right? You all could write a book about your professional expertise, which you all have much of, right? But it's a whole other thing to write about your personal life or feelings, to be like that exact point, like who cares what you feel, right? Like there's almost a sense that your feelings don't matter or aren't important. Whereas, and that's, I want to say there is a masculine versus feminine feeling to that. When, when a girl falls down and cries, like everyone's like, oh, let's take care of her, like make sure she's okay. When a boy falls down and cries, it's like, hey, don't cry, man up, be tough, like pull it in, right?
Yeah.
And that's just, we see that from the playground onward.
Yeah, you're right. It starts at a very early age. Alex, sorry, I think you were wrapping up your portion.
No,
I
I think
cut you off there.
no, I think I'll stop there.
Okay, awesome. No, appreciate you sharing that. And actually, like LinkedIn, that's how we all met, actually, right? And so I appreciate you all reaching out. Because as I started writing about the Asian community topic, I realized how ubiquitous the feeling was, but I didn't realize that going through it. In fact, I like never wrote about the topic when I was at a company because I was always afraid of backlash. And that still exists today, by the way. I don't know if you all have had this experience, but I'll have like folks comment on my posts and then I'm going to reply to it and they're deleted. And they're Asian people about like the Asian, bamboo ceiling topic. And then I go reach out. I'm like, hey, I was just about to reply. And more than like 3 times, people would say, which is a lot, I think, they would say, hey, I deleted it because I was afraid of backlash from my boss because the comment was about my boss. Right. So anyways, like there's like a lot of kind of even more normalizing of the writing and sharing of it that we could do beyond this circle here. Ding, how about you? Can you talk to us about kind of your community? I mean, so far there's a theme, right? We don't really have a consistent community, but it feels like we're building something, right? Even if it's organically. Yeah.
Yeah, totally, Peter. It's with community, it's interesting because remind me where y'all are located.
So I'm in San Diego.
I'm in
Jason's in
Boston.
Brooklyn. Yep. And Alex is in Boston.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I've lived in 2 of those places, in Boston and in New York. San Diego is nice. Overdue for a visit. Maybe we
Yeah,
got
yeah,
linked up
definitely
here.
come by. The water's fine here.
Yeah. So for context, I'm in Texas for one, and then I'm in Austin for 2, right? So from a statistical standpoint, I'd say there's the fewest amount of Asians around me now than there ever have been in my life, besides for when I grew up in the cornfields of the Midwest, right? And there's a parallel that I'm seeing is that I was in a lot of online Asian communities back in the day, right? Whether that's Maple Story, shout out to Maple Story. This for my the younger listeners, might clock that reference. But then the forums back in the day, this maybe it's showing my age now. You're like, what the heck is a forum? Around Asian topics, right? In online communities from a very young age, I was kind of tapped into that thing. And I remember Jason mentioning the Facebook groups and whatnot. And I think it's a solid facsimile, but it's not an outright replacement of getting that interhuman connection. I think there's on the note of mental health, right? There's a difference between having a heart to heart with someone, physical proximity, versus doing the same thing. I love you guys, love that we're on this panel, right? But we're hanging out over a meal. That vibe is different, right? Just from a material standpoint. So I think going out of your way and being intentional, and whether that's tapping into an existing local community or taking initiative and starting one, right? Like I think with online, what we're seeing Peter do, the other piece of that is, don't be afraid to make that intentional outreach. Yeah, I think a lot of us would agree that, having been in this space for a while, and, being an Asian in this space and aware of that identity, yeah, right. I'd imagine all of us are very receptive to when other folks from the community reach out, right? And on some link and build type shit. Excuse me, the swearing, we can have the editor bleep that out.
All good. We can keep it in. All good.
In my experience, it's, I haven't really had anyone say, "Hey, Dean, go after yourself." I don't want to connect with you, right? It's all been very positive and open and receptive. But I think there is that fear sometimes where, hey, the imposter syndrome, am I good enough? Do I bring enough to the table to reach out and utilize this person's time? Where I think, there's a group overall benefit to when more Asians, particularly in the professional world, are tapped in, are connected, can share stories of what's this experience like at this company, right? Is there, what strategies do we have to increase visibility and change the perception, whether that's in the industry and our individual organizations or across the board as a whole. So it's kind of my thoughts of leveraging the online, just being a bit more proactive. I think it benefits, right? The rising tide lifts all boats.
Agreed. Yeah. And yeah, I agree with your point that there's something special about in person. I've been doing a lot more in-person events, so would love to see you all in person at some point too. I feel like that has to happen, right? But I'm glad we all took the initiative to at least get connected starting here. I want to start wrapping up because you all, are very busy. I appreciate again your time investment in this. I'm really excited to get this out into the world. But before I end, let's just go around, do a quick, what is a goal for you this year? Just a personal goal. Doesn't have to be Asian related. I'm just curious. Yeah. So Jason, we'll start with you on that.
Yeah. With the publication of the Path to Pivot book that I recently wrote, I'm now thinking about what's my next book going to be about? And I think I don't need to write the book this year, but I want to start doing the research and start building around the concept, what that is. And so there's a couple of thoughts I have around, is it about being outliers? Is it about, founders who have exited and what their journey is like? Something like that I'm still kind of figuring out, but that's one important goal for me that I'm hoping to explore this year.
Nice. Looking forward to supporting you on that. Cool. Alex, how about you?
I've got a couple. I'll break it down into a couple buckets. So one is doing the work that I do at Workhuman, it's still always, trying to deliver value to my customers and caring for the customer first and the number later, which might scare, maybe some of my sales leaders that listen to this call, but it's always been the way that I've approached things. If I focus in on delivering value for customers, the results will come with it. Being more intentional and continuing to be intentional about this work and just the community-based work. So, the things coming about being intentional about meeting up, and there is something about breaking bread or having coffee and doing those things live, and whether it be with the Asian community or those who are our allies, or who can become our allies, investing in that and investing in those individuals. As a father, continuing to be present and being mindful when I'm not. And then physically, I don't know, this might be a trend that you see a lot of sales folks are doing, but I am running my first half marathon this year.
Nice.
I've always hated running, so I don't know why I signed up for this, but trying to show my kids that, you put a big goal out there and you work towards it and you can achieve big things. So that's what's on tap for this year.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, I feel like I need to do that too. I'm seeing a lot of that within my network.
I think it's a trend. I think it's a trend.
I love it. I remember there was one video you took after a 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. run in the rain. And I was like, oh, I feel like I'm not doing anything. Alex is out there in Boston weather running right now. Anyways, thanks for sharing. Ding, how about you?
Yeah, for sure. I'll break it down into a couple buckets. Right now, I'm working on an album with one of my best friends, MC Clockwork. So looking forward to finishing that up, dropping it. On the company side, just trying to grow this baby up. Stretch goal. Let's break 7 figures in revenue this year. And then on the physical side, I'm not a runner. I have some knee issues. So unfortunately, a marathon might not be in the cards for me. But just cutting down for my winter bulk, trying to get back under 10%. and maybe hit like a pull-up PR on the way. So maybe I'll take
Nice.
some notes from Jason.
I know,
see
seriously.
the arms popping through the shirt.
Yeah, Jason was like, maybe that's why I never approached you in college. I'm like, this guy's like too strong for me.
No, I'm really everyone's genetically blessed in different ways. My dad is kind of skinny. My mom retains a lot of muscle. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. Like
Nice.
I look like I work out more than I do. I do work out, but it's it's its own thing. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
appreciate you guys.
Jason was doing a charity thing where he was doing, what was it, 100 push-ups in between like mentor sessions? Was that what it
Yeah, we
was?
did I did 200 burpees every hour for 5 hours, and then I interviewed people about mentorship. And Peter, I think you are on there, so it was really great to have you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it was fun to yeah, I was like, yeah, I was more tuning in for the burpees than mentorship talk.
Amazing.
Anyways, appreciate you all. I think we'll end it there. This was amazing for me, super inspiring, motivating. Like I said, I think we should keep in touch, this crew, and I think a lot of great learnings for the people who tune in. So really, really appreciate you all on a Friday doing this. And yeah, let's definitely stay in touch and have a great weekend.
Yeah, appreciate you putting this together, Peter, and all the work that you're doing to amplify this message.
Of course. Yeah, we'll keep it going. We'll keep it
thanks,
going.
Peter. Yeah,
All
great
right.
meeting you guys.
You too.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I'll circulate everybody's contact
Thanks,
info. This is
Peter.
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Guys, have a great weekend.
Bye, you
Great
too.
weekend. Take care.